In this video I'm going to look at the circumstances that led up to the spring 2021 violence in Israel, Gaza and the West Bank. At the time of doing this presentation, a ceasefire has been announced and more information will come out later. The cost of it so far is 232 dead in Gaza, 26 dead in the West Bank, 13 dead in Israel and 2 killed on the Israel-Lebanon border. Thousands of people have been injured to various degrees and tens of thousands will be left with problems relating to post-traumatic stress disorder. More than 72,000 Palestinian people have been displaced. Damage in infrastructure and real estate will run into hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. This short conflict will have increased hatred on both sides and above all in Israel, making a peace agreement even more difficult to obtain and increasing the level of threat to Israel. So there are the losers. Who are the winners? Well, Netanyahu may now be able to form a coalition, the far right in Israel will have seen its hands strengthened, and Hamas has gained a lot of kudos over its rival, Fatah. In my opinion, all of this could have been easily avoided and simply by learning the lessons of history. Here I'm going to try to be as neutral as possible and as concise as possible, but I'm sure people will attack me from both sides. At the beginning of April 2021 there was relative peace. True, the roadblocks were in place, Gaza was under siege, and from time to time a rocket would be fired from there into Israel. Resentment was simmering, but the biggest threat to Israel must have seemed to have been Iran. Within Israel, the government was struggling to stay in power. Amongst Palestinians, Hamas appears to have been losing popularity and possibly sought ways to bring people to it. The last conflict between Israel and Hamas had been in 2014, and there is nothing that works as well as conflict for getting people to flock to your side, whichever side that may happen to be. Surprisingly to many, when Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital in 2017 and moved the US Embassy to the Holy City, there were no large-scale protests as many had predicted. Nor were there when 4 Arab countries entered into diplomatic relations with Israel, despite the consensus view being that this would not happen until a final Middle East peace was reached. Coronavirus appeared to be under control in Israel, although not yet in Gaza and the West Bank. It seems as though many in Gaza questioned the need for conflict, considering the economy and poverty to be far more important issues. The first day of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, the 13th of April 2021, coincided with Memorial Day in Israel. On Memorial Day, Israelis remember those who lost their lives fighting for the country. The Israeli president wanted to make a speech at the Western Wall, the location of the former temple, and as such a sacred site in the Jewish religion. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is located directly above the Western Wall, built on top of where 2 Jewish temples once stood, the last being destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. In Jerusalem, one can hear the prayers being sung from minarets via loudspeakers over a large area of the city, and the staff of the president feared that his speech would not be heard, so that they requested the prayers not be relayed via loudspeakers. Mosque officials refused what they considered a disrespectful request, so Israeli police officers entered the mosque and cut the cables to the loudspeakers. One must ask why the president could not have found a different place for his speech. To do it at the Western Wall at a time when prayers were taking place, as they have done for hundreds of years, is absurd in the extreme. However, what is worse is the insult to the Al-Aqsa Mosque of entering and then cutting the cables. This was totally unnecessary, and given previous history, given the reason why non-Muslims are not allowed to enter, then this was a very provocative act. At the same time, the police closed off a square outside the Damascus Gate, one of the main entrances to the old city of Jerusalem. Young Palestinians gather there at night during Ramadan. The police said that the square was closed to prevent dangerously large crowds from forming there. This may not have been an unreasonable request given the situation with coronavirus, and indeed Israel was to suffer its biggest ever crowd disaster only 17 days later. Nonetheless, it was not seen that way by the locals, and this led to protests and in turn regular nightly clashes between the police and young Palestinian men. The protesters were mainly residents of East Jerusalem, theoretically citizens of Israel following its capture of the city in June 1967 and later annexation. However, many do not choose to be Israelis. Many have not claimed citizenship and thus the right to vote, as they feel that this may confer legitimacy on the occupying power. On the 25th of April, permission was once more granted for crowds to gather outside the Damascus Gate, but by then there were other problems. Resentment, or seeking to press advantage about the Mosque and Damascus Gate incidents, led to clashes between Muslim and Jewish inhabitants of Israel. Some scenes of violence being videoed and posted on the internet, which in turn led to copycat attacks. This led to more reprisals, counter-reprisals, and a downward spiral of violence. On the 20th of April, hundreds of members of an extreme nationalist Jewish group, Lahava, marched through central Jerusalem shouting "Death to Arabs" and attacking people as though they looked as though they were Arab in the streets. A group of Jews was filmed attacking a Palestinian home, and others assaulted drivers who were perceived to be Palestinian, whilst in other areas of Israel, Jews and Arabs alike became the victims of assaults from thugs on the other side. Violence occurred in Acre, Beersheba, Haifa, Lod, Nasiriyah, Rahat, Ramla and Tiberias, amongst other places. The Israeli government, trying to form another coalition, needed the support of several extreme right-wing MPs, some of whom sympathise with the aims of the far right in Israel. This is Itamar Ben-Gvir, a far-right activist who first came to public attention when he appeared on television in 1995 protesting against the Oslo Accords, showing a Cadillac emblem that had been stolen from Premier Yitzhak Rabin's car and declared, "We got to his car and we'll get to him too." Indeed, they did get to him. Rabin was murdered a few weeks later. Gvir is a lawyer who was initially denied the right to take his legal exams on account of his far-right activities, but was granted permission eventually. He has represented a number of far-right activists, and newspaper Haaretz described him as the go-to person for extremists when they get themselves in trouble. Gvir has been associated with Lahava for a very long time, and he wants Arab citizens who he considers disloyal to be expelled. He's one of a tiny group of Jews who provocatively live in the overwhelmingly Arab West Bank city of Hebron, guarded by the Israeli army. He had a portrait of Baruch Goldstein in his living room, a Jewish terrorist who murdered 29 Palestinians in Hebron in 1994. He only removed the portrait in the run-up to the 2nd of March 2020 general election. He now appears to be spending much time in the Sheikh Jarrah district of Jerusalem in order to encourage the expulsion of the Arab inhabitants from the neighborhood, and has suggested to the police that they fire on protesters. It is people like Gvir who Netanyahu may have to turn to if he is to keep his government coalition alive. The internet, and above all TikTok, has highlighted the case of 6 Palestinian families facing expulsion from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah district of East Jerusalem. Sheikh Jarrah is approximately 2 kilometers north of the old city of Jerusalem. Israeli law allows Jews to reclaim land in East Jerusalem that was owned by Jews before 1948. A court had to decide if the occupants would lose their homes or not. This led to protests and violence beamed for everyone to see over the internet. Whereas I'm sure many would agree that if someone's home was lost or taken, even if it were 74 years ago, then there could be an argument entitling them to either restitution or compensation. From here in Europe, I agree that people who were forced out of their homes by the Nazis and then had their property nationalized by the communists are entitled to something. However, if there are families living in the former homes of the expellees, then the families currently living there are not kicked out, especially not if they have lived there for all their lives. The claimants are given something else of equal value, or a value determined by a court. It could in fact in some cases be as low as 10%, as was suggested here in Poland. But they are given something. Furthermore, logic and justice dictates that the same law should apply to the descendants of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled their homes when Israel was created, but they have no means to reclaim their family's land. Not exactly an eye for an eye. On 29th of April, President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority cancelled the Palestinian elections. The violence was a gift for Hamas, which could now appear to be the defender of Palestinians. On the 4th of May 2021, Mohammed Deif, the head of the Hamas military organization, Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, threatened that if the attacks on our families in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood do not stop immediately, we will not stand idly by, and the enemy will pay a heavy price. Mohammed Deif is one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, with the blood of many victims on his hands. Israel has made at least 8 attempts to kill him. It's wounded him severely, it's killed his wife and his children, but he is still around in hiding, and this comment was made by a recorded statement. On Friday the 7th of May, there was a police raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The events leading up to this are not clear. The police said they were pelted with stones from there. The protesters say that it was unprovoked attack. However, the police did invade the mosque compound using tear gas and stun grenades shortly after 8 in the evening. The disturbances went on for most of the night. Monday, the 10th of May, was the date for the final court hearing on the Sheikh Jarrah expulsions. It was also Jerusalem Day, when Jews celebrate the capture of East Jerusalem in 1967. Some Jewish nationalists usually try to mark the day by marching through the Muslim quarter of the old city and trying to visit the Temple Mount, the site on which the Al-Aqsa Mosque is built. Having provoked the Arab population to this level, now the Israeli government, perhaps realizing the danger, tried to calm things down. The Supreme Court hearing in the eviction case was postponed. An order barred Jews from entering the mosque compound. However, there appears to have been another stone throwing incident from the mosque. Logically, Muslims may have stocked up on projectiles, fearing an attack from far-right Jews or the police. The police once more entered the compound and once more used tear gas, stun grenades and rubber bullets. Now, the Israeli government rerouted the Jerusalem Day March away from the Muslim quarter, but it was too late to stop the escalation. The Israeli army, fearing the consequences, started to warn people living near the Gaza border. Rocket attacks on Israel are not unusual. In 2021, up to the 10th of May, a total of 53 rockets were fired in 7 attacks, with only 1 being met by an Israeli response. However, the situation was by now far more serious. Just after 1800 hours local time, Hamas launched a rocket attack from Gaza on Jerusalem, and the Israeli military responded in kind, trying to knock out the locations of the missile launches. Hamas launched more missiles, and then the situation just spiraled out of control. Thank you for listening. As I said at the beginning, I try to be as neutral as possible, but I clearly am apportioning blame for the beginnings of this conflict. If you found this of interest, you might want to subscribe. I normally deal in history, which happened a little bit further back in time.